Welcome to Green is Good, raising awareness of each individual's impact on the environment and helping to create a more beautiful and sustainable world. Now, here's John Shigarian, Chairman and CEO of Electronic Recyclers International, and Mike Brady.
Welcome to Green is Good. And Mike, it's always wonderful to see you and be with you in studio again.
Yep, I echo those sentiments exactly, John. It's good to see you, my friend. And boy, what a week it's been. And here we are, ready for another full hour of great information and entertainment that we can enlighten and inform and empower our listeners to do the green thing.
You know what? And Mike, I always think you and I are two lucky guys. We started this show over 2 years ago. We didn't know which way it would go, but we've got so lucky and are so blessed to have attracted so many great guests. And what makes our show so interesting and wonderful, this is what we hear from all our listeners all the time, is our guests.
Oh, yeah, it's all about the guests. And I mean, there's so many cool aha moments and who knew facts that I don't know, I get lit up every week. This is the high point of my week.
Yeah, mine too. And again, this is just another great week. We've got two great brands on today. We've got EcoCycle and the bulk is Green Council. So our listeners should listen to this message and then come on back to Green is Good.
If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so honored today to have from Denver, Colorado, Dan Maich with us on, and Dan is the manager of EcoCycle over in Denver. Welcome to Green is Good, Dan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Dan, it's such an honor to have you because you do such great work at EcoCycle, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But, you always, like all of our great guests, everyone has a fascinating journey. And Mike and I get so many emails all the time because, so many of the young people out there in college or in graduate school want to grow up and have a professional career and want to be the next Dan Maich. So, why don't, instead of me reading your wonderful bio, why don't you walk our listeners through first, your journey and how you came to be where you are right now?
I can do that. When I graduated from college, I found myself really by chance working for a wonderful organization called Recycle Ann Arbor, and it was a nonprofit, volunteer-driven organization back in the 70s that was focused on trying to organize neighborhoods and businesses in Ann Arbor, Michigan to get basic recycling services going because there weren't any. And I started there, and that's where my recycling journey began, and I worked for them for a number of years before I decided I needed to move on from college town life. And I tried a few careers along the way, and eventually I became an organic farmer in Boulder, Colorado. And I sold at farmers markets in Boulder and elsewhere, and a real challenge that I had as a farmer was maintaining the fertility of my soil. And when I was standing there at the farmer's market, I always thought, if I could just bring back, I'd go with a full truck and I go back to my farm with an empty truck. I thought if I could just fill that truck up easily with food waste after I sell all my good, fresh farm produce and bring it back to my farm and put it in my compost pile, it would be so much easier to compost than, traveling all over the place, trying to find manure that works for me and renting some rickety truck to bring it to my farm and then composting it. So I pondered that for a long time, and eventually I had lunch with the executive director of EcoCycle, Eric Lombardi, and he said, that's exactly what EcoCycle is trying to do, except it's not just for one farm. We're trying to do it for a whole community. We're trying to get composting tacked on to the recycling that EcoCycle is already doing. And so he convinced me to come on staff and try to get EcoCycle into the compost business. And meanwhile, he was starting up a new facility called the Center for Hard Recycled Materials. And so as I worked on compost, he said, well, why don't you once you start up this new facility as well. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
And do you still have your own, do you and your wife still have your organic vegetable farm?
We do. It's family property.
Nice.
We're not professional growers anymore. We just grow. We grow as much of our own food as we possibly can. And
That's wonderful.
It's a significant amount. Yeah, it's fun.
That is, and so when you were doing Recycle Ann Arbor, just for our listeners' sake, that was really way, way, way before it was really cool to be in the green revolution or to recycle. That was very early in this whole curve, whereas now the green revolution seems to be on fire here, and we've hit some sort of critical mass in the United States, and everyone seems to really want to be getting involved more and more. You were really one of the early movers, one of the visionaries who really got involved with recycling back when. And
EcoCycle, as it happens, is really a sister organization of Recycle Ann Arbor. It has really the exact same history. It was founded in 1976. It was the same deal. It was entirely volunteers originally. They had a bunch of old school buses. They took all the seats out, and they went out on Saturdays and picked up everybody's carefully bundled newspapers that they had left out on the curb for them. And now, 35 years later, EcoCycle has 70 employees, and we are the official recycling processor for Boulder County, and we process about 55,000 tons a year now, and we operate as a nonprofit social enterprise, which means we work on a 10% margin, basically. We're set up in that way so that we can succeed and fold our income, our profits back into the programs.
And you're not only the manager of EcoCycle, and for our listeners out there, to see EcoCycle's wonderful website, it's www.ecocycle.com. Not only are you the manager of that, but you're also the manager of CHARM, CHARM. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the acronym CHARM stands for with regards to what you do at EcoCycle?
CHARM stands for Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, and it was started 10 years ago. EcoCycle, to that point, had been a recycling company focused on what we call the traditional recyclables, meaning the paper fiber and all the containers, steel and plastic and so on. That stuff that people are familiar with recycling all over the country, great as it is, only amounts to about a third of our waste stream. And EcoCycle saw about 15 years ago that, recycling rates had kind of stagnated at that 30 to 35% rate. And meanwhile, the landfills are filling up really at a greater rate than they were before. So we realized that we needed to expand our vision and look at the entire waste stream and look at how we could really come up with a realistic alternative to a landfill. So we came up with 6 essential facilities that a community needs. And one of those is a Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, or CHARM. And the point of the CHARM is that those traditional materials, as I said, are about a third of the waste stream, and then about really almost half of the waste stream is organic materials. And by organic, I don't mean a farming practice like organic carrots. I mean anything that was alive, so yard waste, food waste, and so on. That stuff is all compostable, and that's about half the waste stream. And then after that, you have all of our gadgets and products that we surround ourselves with, and a lot of them are not recyclable readily. Certainly you can't put them at the curb. So a lot of it is packaging, a lot of it is products that are made of multiple materials that have to be deconstructed to get recycled. So what we tried to do at Charm is one category of that huge range of materials at a time. We figure out what would it take to recycle this material. So, for instance, we started with plastic bags and pallet wrap, warehouse pallet wrap. And we found that there is a company that is already getting pallet wrap from huge warehouses and turning it into composite lumber, but they hadn't tried it on a post-consumer level, and we convinced them that the key to the Charm is that it's open to the public, and about 2/3 of our visitors here are just the general public, and a third are businesses, and everybody who comes to the Charm drives up to the window, and we check what they have and make sure that's our quality assurance point, and we make sure that they have what we're looking for. And we convinced this composite lumber company that quality assurance would give them the same level of pure stuff that they were used to post-industrial with these warehouses. So that's how we started, and sort of one material at a time, we add new offerings for the local residents to recycle, and now we're up to about 24 different materials.
In case you just joined us right now, we are on the phone with Dan Mach, who is the Compost and Center for Hard to Recycle Materials Manager in Boulder, Colorado. And Dan, one of the things on your great website, recycle.org, ecocycle.org.
And I gave the wrong one out a little while ago, so thank you, Mike.
Sure, ecocycle.org. And I'm looking at it right now, John.
Yep,
and Dan, and here's you give the 10 reasons to recycle, and number 5, I think, really strikes a particular chord. A lot of people think about landfill. It's like, okay, well, it's just a big hole. You throw everything in there. But I did not know really until looking at your site that the landfill owners are only responsible for their landfill for 30 years after it's closed. So when there's no more room to put it and they bulldoze everything over and try and plant trees or whatever, make it look pretty, after 30 years, there is nobody, quote, responsible for any of the leaching of any of the toxic materials in there into the ground or water system.
Right, and I suppose not coincidentally, the plastic liner that is at the bottom of every modern landfill has about a 30-year life. So the EPA acknowledges that the liners that they specify are going to leak at some point, and we're talking about perpetuity here. And there's supposed to be a cap on a landfill as well, and that's made out of clay. Yet cracks develop in that cap, and rainwater works its way through a landfill. It's supposed to be. It's called a dry tomb landfill. That's what a modern landfill is called conceptually, but it's not. There's a lot of liquids that are being buried in the first place, and then rainwater gets in there as well, and it picks up various nasty chemicals along the way, and by the time it's at the bottom of the landfill, looking for a crack to fall to get through, a hole in the liner to get through, it has various chemicals attached to it that then leak into the groundwater.
Dan, one of the on your great website, again, it's EcoCycle, www.ecocycle.org, and thanks, Mike, for correcting me.
Sure.
You have a very, very interesting section on zero waste. Can you explain to our listeners, it's becoming more and more part of our vernacular, or people are reading about it or seeing a headline or seeing a big company's goals to zero waste or a city's goal to zero waste. Can you explain what zero waste really means with regards to our waste streams, landfills, and what great organizations like yours does to help us all move towards that goal?
Well, the beautiful thing about zero waste is it's not looking only at the end of the pipe, what happens when we're discarding stuff, and what can we recycle and compost there. It's also looking at what we call the midstream longevity of a product's use, and maximizing that product's longevity through reuse, repair, and working with industry to make their designs more durable. And then also we are working upstream, waste reduction upstream, meaning that we are we're doing a lot of educating with purchasers, whether it's general public or our business customers, helping them, educating them on what purchases that they can make that will result in less waste. And literally the first thing that we do when we have a new business customer is go through their dumpster with them, and we find styrofoam coffee cups, and we tell them, okay, here's something that you can buy as a compostable product, and you can buy a compostable coffee cup, and then you can put it in the compost dumpster that we're going to give to you. So it's looking at the entire life cycle of a product, and also bringing
that's interesting.
the manufacturer of the product in that discussion of the concept of producer responsibility, which is that the manufacturer right at the design table is thinking about what's going to happen to this product at the end of its life, and how do we keep it out of the landfill. And as long as the designer has that as a design parameter, really 90% of our problems are solved. Then it's just a matter of educating people to put stuff in the right bin, or in the case of more sophisticated stuff like electronics, make sure you get to the right electronics recycler. It just makes our job much easier, and really, we're not going to ever get anywhere near zero waste until we have the manufacturers on board. And electronics are the sort of poster child where there are a lot of manufacturers are really getting on board, as you know, John.
Right.
And hopefully, and it is showing a model for other manufacturers and other industries on how that can happen.
So truly, this isn't just the consumers and great organizations like you working together with landfills and other stakeholders, but it's truly then even bringing in the manufacturers of these products, and it's a very holistic approach to working towards the great goal of zero waste. It's just not binary.
Right, and another arm of this leg that we need to work is we need to change the rules a little bit. We need government involvement. Right now, the laws that settled our country, if you will, favor extraction. It's extractive industry to build this country into what it is. Now, not so much. Now we need to stop burying our resources in landfills and keep them in circulation. And so we need regulations that favor that.
It's really amazing. You just hit on something there that resonated with me, Dan. Stop burying our resources. I mean, when we start looking at what we, quote, throw away, and John is so fond of saying there's no place called away, but if we look at our, quote, garbage or our refuse as resources, that really does stand the whole conversation on its head.
Right, and as a farmer, I witness firsthand that the cycles of nature, and in nature, there is of course no waste. Without human invention, there wouldn't be any waste. So we need to all get back to nature here a little bit and mimic the natural cycle that of the planet that we live on. Otherwise, we're going to run into a little trouble.
And, and speaking of that, then, talk a little bit about the great work you do with regards to composting. What does that really look like, and what does that mean, and how do our listeners get more involved with that growing phenomena and important also form of recycling?
Well, the best form of composting out there is backyard composting, and certainly that's not for everyone, but in terms of efficiency, you can't beat it because you don't have to send a truck out to pick the stuff up. You don't have to build a great big facility to handle it. You can just do it right in your backyard, and of course the great benefit of that is you have the finished product to use in your gardens. So that's definitely part of our message, but we do have a food waste collection program that we offer to businesses and Boulder and other communities in Boulder, as well as certainly a lot in California and elsewhere in the country. There is a curbside compost program where you can set your yard waste and your food waste out on the curb, and it'll get picked up once a week, and it'll go to a compost facility. And so in order to handle this kind of compost, you need a pretty industrial system. You can, because it does generate an odor. So unless you can take it out to the middle of nowhere economically and compost it where there's no neighbors, you need a fairly industrialized, fairly expensive compost facility, and that's one of the pieces that I mentioned that's necessary to achieve zero waste, and they are expensive and a challenge to design. But on the other hand, compared to siting a new landfill or an incinerator, it's a piece of cake.
That's so interesting. And so the urban legend is, hey, I could just throw my food garbage in with all my other garbage and it's just going to biodegrade in the landfill. That's really not really the way to do it, and that's not the case.
If organic material goes to the landfill, as I mentioned, it's called a dry tomb landfill, and everyone, I think, has read stories of unearthing an old landfill, and you can still read the newspaper from 1930 or whatever. But organic material does slowly break down as it comes into contact with liquids. But instead of turning into compost, it generates methane, and that methane escapes from the landfill and contributes to global warming. In fact, landfills are the single greatest human-caused source of global warming because methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So, and really, I think what listeners need to know is how they really fit in here is you can't just throw everything in the trash. I think there's a fallacy that's out there that, well, if I just want one container to throw everything in, and then, somebody will recycle stuff out of there and somebody will compost stuff out of there. It doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, it's too expensive to separate stuff once it's all mixed together. It's the sloppy wet stuff contaminates the stuff that needs to stay dry. So source separation is a key to zero waste, and what that means is that the consumer separates the recyclables from the compostables from the trash. That's what we advocate, and that's what a lot of communities, especially in California, are doing is a 3-sort separation.
Dan, you mentioned earlier the sort of the sister relationship between Recycle Ann Arbor and EcoCycle. Are there other great organizations like EcoCycle throughout the United States?
Well, there are very few like EcoCycle. As I mentioned, Recycle Ann Arbor.
Sure.
What Recycle Ann Arbor does still exist. They are not quite. They don't. It's still a great operation, but they, as well as a lot of other of those similar organizations that were started by all those enthusiastic hippies back in the 70s. They as certain materials like newspaper and steel cans became profitable to recycle. These for-profits lost out on, a city would decide, okay, this needs to go out to bid now. It's profitable, and it would the for-profits would beat out the nonprofits, and then they'd turn around and get rid of anything that wasn't profitable to them. So there are very few organizations like EcoCycle. There are organizations that we work with very closely on this concept of zero waste. There's an organization called the Zero Waste International Alliance, and zero waste is international. In fact, the first country to call itself zero waste and create a zero waste action plan is New Zealand. So there's a lot going on all over the world. Islands are doing a lot of zero waste work because landfills are always upstream from the development, which is always right on the coast. And so the landfills are contaminating the groundwater in an island, and they have limited sources of water, so they recognize very quickly how they need to keep that clean. There is a group that's representing all over the world that we work with to promote the concept of zero waste.
Got it. And Dan, we're at the end here for today, but you're always welcome to come back on Green is Good and talk about anything else you're doing and all the great things you're doing at EcoCycle. And for our listeners out there, again, please go to Dan's great website, www.ecocycle.org. It's a fascinating website. It shows you points of entrance for businesses, volunteers, schools, governments, retailers, and manufacturers. Wherever you sit, you can become part of this great movement and community towards zero waste. Dan Maish, you are a visionary and sustainability leader and truly living proof that green is good.